The rain in Cresthaven didn't wash away the blood. It only made it spread. A 7-year-old girl, barefoot and trembling in a torn nightgown, hurled herself against the iron-wrought gates of the most feared estate in the state. "Please!" she screamed into the abyss of the grand courtyard, her tiny hands stained crimson. "They're beating my mama." When the heavy oak doors finally creaked open, the figure that stepped out wasn't a savior, but a monster. The ancient vampire king looked down at the weeping child. What he did next didn't just shatter the ancient laws of their hidden world, it painted the entire town red. The town of Cresthaven, nestled deep within the dense evergreen shadows of the Cascade Mountains, was a place where secrets went to die and stay buried. For Serafina Hayes, it was a prison disguised as a refuge. 26 years old, with hollowed cheekbones and exhausted green eyes, she worked double shifts at the local diner just to keep the heat running in her dilapidated mobile home on the outskirts of King County. She was a single mother, fiercely protective of her 7-year-old daughter Lily, but hard work was never enough in a town practically owned by Derek Gallagher. Derek was a ruthless loan shark and the unofficial enforcer of Cresthaven's criminal underbelly. On paper, he ran a legitimate private security firm, Gallagher Protection Services. In reality, he bled the desperate residents dry. Worse still were the rumors, whispers among the late-night drunks, that Derek answered to something far more terrifying than the local police or federal authorities. The locals spoke of a tithe, a blood tax paid to the monsters that lived beyond the tree line, up on the bluffs where no human dared to trespass. It was shortly after midnight on a torrential Tuesday when the heavy thud of boots sounded on Serafina's rotting wooden porch. Serafina was at the kitchen counter counting a meager stack of crumpled $1 bills and loose change, her heart sinking with every tally. It wasn't enough. It wasn't even close to the interest she owed Derek for the loan she had taken out months ago for Lily's pneumonia medication. Before she could even move to lock the deadbolt, the front door was kicked inward with a deafening crash, the frame splintering violently into the small living room. Derek stepped out of the pouring rain, shaking the water from his expensive leather jacket. He was flanked by two massive men, Gavin and Troy, their faces hardened by years of unquestioned brutality. "Serafina," Derek purred, his voice a sickening contrast to the violent entry. He kicked a fallen piece of the doorframe aside. "It's the 15th. You know how much I hate the rain, yet here I am, making a house call." "Derek, please," Serafina begged instinctively, stepping backward to block the narrow hallway that led to Lily's bedroom. "I have half of it. I just need until Friday. My boss is giving me an advance." "Half?" Derek interrupted, feigning a look of deep disappointment. He signaled to Gavin. "Does half pay the men who keep this town safe? Does half appease our investors?" Gavin lunged forward, grabbing Serafina by her hair. She let out a sharp cry of pain as she was thrown violently against the cheap veneer of the kitchen cabinets. Pots and pans clattered to the linoleum floor. In the darkness of the hallway, a small door creaked open. Lily, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit, stood frozen, her wide blue eyes fixed on the terrifying scene. "I swear to you, I'll get it," Serafina screamed, her nose bleeding profusely where it had struck the counter. She saw Lily in the periphery of her vision, and her maternal panic skyrocketed. "Lily, run! Get out the back window!" Derek's eyes snapped to the hallway. A cruel, predatory smile spread across his face. Well, if Mommy can't pay the debt, maybe we can find some use for the kid. There are certain private buyers out of state who pay top dollar for fresh young stock." "Don't you touch her!" Serafina roared with a sudden feral strength. She threw herself at Derek, her nails raking across his face, drawing a deep, satisfying line of blood down his cheek. Derek cursed, backhanding her with a sickening crack. Serafina hit the floor hard, her vision swimming. "Teach her a lesson," Derek spat, pressing a handkerchief to his bleeding cheek. "Make sure she understands the penalty for disrespect." Gavin and Troy descended on the helpless mother. The sound of heavy boots connecting with bone echoed through the cramped trailer, accompanied by Serafina's muffled cries. "Mama!" Lily shrieked, taking a step forward. "Run, Lily!" Serafina choked out, coughing up blood. "To the woods! Run!" Knowing she could do nothing against the giant men and driven by the sheer terror in her mother's command, the 7-year-old turned and bolted. She scrambled through her bedroom, forcefully pushed open the small, rusted window, and tumbled out into the freezing mud of the backyard, just as Troy's heavy footsteps pounded down the hallway. "The little brat went out the window," Troy yelled. "Forget her for now," Derek commanded from the living room, the sound of his boot striking Seraphina's ribs echoing into the night. "She won't survive the Boundary Woods anyway. Let the creatures have her." Lily ran blindly into the suffocating darkness of the Crest Haven woods. The torrential rain plastered her thin white nightgown to her shivering body, and the freezing mud sucked at her bare feet. The tree branches whipped her face, leaving stinging red welts across her pale cheeks, but the adrenaline and pure, unadulterated terror propelled her forward. "They're hurting Mama," the thought played on a torturous loop in her mind. She needed help. She needed the police, but her mother had told her never to trust the Crest Haven police because they worked for Derek. There was nowhere to go in the town. Unknowingly, Lily had crossed the rusted iron markers, driven into the earth, the ancient boundary line. She was running up the steep incline toward the Sterling estate. Generations of Crest Haven residents had passed down strict warnings about the Sterling property. It was a sprawling, Gothic monstrosity, perched on the cliffs overlooking the valley. No one who went past the iron markers ever came back. It was private property owned by a reclusive billionaire family that never showed their faces during daylight. Lily didn't know about the legends. She only knew she needed a grown-up who was stronger than Derek. Her foot caught on a thick, exposed root, and she went flying forward, tumbling down a steep embankment of shale and wet leaves. She cried out as sharp rocks sliced open her knees and the palms of her hands. She lay there for a moment in the mud, the cold seeping into her very bones, sobbing uncontrollably, the coppery smell of her own blood mixed with the damp earth. She forced herself to her feet. The trees suddenly broke, revealing massive wrought-iron gates, standing at least 20 feet tall, intertwined with thorny black vines. Beyond them, an imposing stone manor loomed in the mist, its windows completely dark, like the hollow eyes of a skull. Lily ran to the gates, grabbing the freezing iron bars. The metal bit into her torn hands, smearing fresh blood on the ancient steel. "Help!" she screamed, her voice cracking, swallowed by the roar of the thunder. "Please, is anyone there? They're beating my mama." Inside the manor, sitting in pitch darkness on a velvet armchair, was Caspian Sterling. Caspian was the sovereign of the Western Covens, an apex predator who had walked the earth for nearly 7 centuries. He was a being of unfathomable power, wealth, and boredom. For the last 50 years, he had isolated himself in this estate, tired of the petty politics of the immortal courts, and entirely disgusted by the modern evolution of humanity. His skin was like flawless alabaster, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and his eyes were a piercing, luminescent silver that glowed faintly in the unlit room. He had heard the child's heartbeat from a mile away. Normally, trespassers on his land were dealt with swiftly by his guards, their bodies drained and buried before they could even scream. But tonight, he had ordered his sentinels to stand down. When the child had tripped and cut herself, the scent of her blood had drifted on the wind seeping through the cracked windows of the manor. The moment it hit Caspian's senses, his dead heart gave a violent, impossible stutter. It was a scent he hadn't encountered in over 200 years. It smelled of wild lavender rain and a specific rare genetic strain, a singer bloodline. But not just any singer. It held the faint, diluted echo of an aristocratic vampire lineage mixed with human frailty. Before he fully processed his own actions, Caspian vanished from the armchair. Lily was still shaking the gates, crying so hard she was hyperventilating. Suddenly, the shadows on the other side of the gate seemed to coalesce, twisting and forming into a solid, towering figure. Lily gasped, stumbling backward and falling onto her bleeding hands. The heavy, enchanted locks on the gates, which required a specialized drop of vampire blood to open, suddenly shrieked and shattered. The massive iron doors swung inward without a sound. Caspian stepped out into the storm. The rain seemed to actively avoid him, his immaculate bespoke black suit entirely dry. He looked down at the tiny, muddy, bleeding creature at his feet. His silver eyes were terrifying, devoid of human warmth, yet locked onto her with terrifying intensity. "You are trespassing." Caspian's voice was like velvet wrapped around a blade, soft, deep, and incredibly dangerous. It vibrated in Lily's chest. Most adults would have died of sheer fright looking into the eyes of the vampire king, but Lily was too consumed by the horrors she had left behind. Mister! Lily sobbed, crawling forward on her bloody knees and grabbing the impeccably tailored hem of his trousers. Caspian flinched, staring in shock at the bloody handprints she left on the fabric. No one had touched him so casually in centuries. Please, she begged, looking up into his glowing eyes. You have to help me. They're going to kill her. Derek is beating my mama. There's so much blood. Caspian stared down at the child. The scent of her bleeding hands was overwhelming, intoxicating, pulling at the darkest, most predatory instincts in his brain. But beneath the hunger was an overwhelming, burning curiosity. Who is your mother, little bird? Caspian asked, his voice a dangerous whisper that cut through the storm. Serafina, Lily cried. Serafina Hayes. We live in the trailers. Please, you're big. You can stop them. Serafina. The name meant nothing to him, but the blood meant everything. It was a puzzle wrapped in a tragedy, and for the first time in half a century, the Vampire King felt a spark of dark, violent interest. Caspian slowly crouched down, his movements fluid and inhuman. He reached out a pale hand and gently wiped a tear mixed with mud from the girl's cheek. His skin was freezing cold. Tell me, little bird, Caspian said softly, a terrifying, cruel smile playing at the corner of his lips. Do you want these men punished, or do you want them erased? Lily didn't understand the difference, but she saw the darkness in the stranger's eyes, a darkness that made the monsters back home seem like nothing but pathetic shadows. I want them to stop hurting her, Lily whispered. Done, Caspian declared. Caspian stood up, his towering frame casting a long, unnatural shadow over the child despite the lack of moonlight. He removed his tailored black suit jacket, a garment worth more than the entire trailer park Lily lived in, and draped it over the freezing, trembling girl. It swallowed her whole, smelling of ancient cedar and expensive cologne. Hold on tightly, Caspian commanded. Before Lily could ask what he meant, he scooped her up into his arms. The world instantly blurred into a terrifying streak of colors and wind. Lily squeezed her eyes shut, burying her face into Caspian's shoulder as the G-force pressed her against his chest. They weren't running, they were flying through the forest, the trees nothing but a liquid smear. Back at the trailer on Route 9, the situation had devolved into pure barbarism. Serafina lay on the shattered linoleum of her kitchen, barely conscious. Her left eye was swollen shut, her ribs screamed with every shallow breath, and a pool of crimson had formed around her head. Derek stood over her, breathing heavily, rolling up his sleeves. Gavin and Troy were ransacking the trailer, tearing apart the meager belongings in search of anything of value. This is pathetic, Derek spat, kicking Serafina's limp leg. Not a damn thing in this garbage dump. Gavin, just bag her up. We're taking her to the warehouse. She can work off her debt on her back, and if she doesn't survive, we'll sell the organs. What about the kid? Troy asked, stepping out of Lily's bedroom, holding a shattered piggy bank. Leave her to the wolves, Derek sneered. Suddenly, the torrential rain outside stopped hitting the roof of the trailer. It wasn't that the storm had passed. The air pressure in the room plummeted so rapidly that the windows groaned their glass, bowing inward. The cheap, flickering fluorescent light overhead exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the trailer into near darkness, illuminated only by the headlights of Derek's SUV outside. What the hell was that? Gavin muttered, drawing a heavy-caliber pistol from his waistband. From the front porch, where the door had been kicked in, a voice drifted into the trailer. It was quiet, conversational, yet it resonated with a bone-chilling authority that made all three men freeze in their tracks. You track mud into her home, you shatter her belongings, and you put your filthy, unwashed hands on a woman whose bloodline you are unworthy to even breathe near. Derek whipped around, drawing his own weapon. Standing in the broken doorway was a man who looked like he had stepped out of a high-fashion editorial, contrasting violently with the squalor of the trailer park. His silver eyes practically glowed in the dark. Beside him, huddled inside a massive suit jacket, was Lily. Lily? Serafina weakly gasped from the floor, trying to reach out her hand. Mama! Lily cried, but Caspian gently placed a hand on her shoulder, keeping her firmly behind him on the porch. Stay here, little bird, Caspian murmured. He then stepped over the threshold. Who the hell are you? Derek demanded, aiming his gun directly at Caspian's chest. You lost, buddy. You're in Gallagher territory. I suggest you turn around and walk away before I put a hollow point between your glowing little eyes. Caspian tilted his head, genuinely amused. Gallagher, a descendant of Irish mud farmers, I presume. How quaint. You claim this territory, yet you know nothing of the ground you stand upon. "Shoot this freak!" Derek barked. Gavin didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger 3 times in rapid succession. The deafening roar of the gunshots in the small enclosed space made Serafina scream, but Caspian didn't fall. He didn't even flinch. The bullets hung suspended in the air mere inches from Caspian's chest, trapped in an invisible, localized kinetic field. With a lazy flick of his wrist, the flattened lead dropped harmlessly to the linoleum floor, clinking like dropped coins. The silence that followed was absolute, save for the panicked, ragged breathing of the 3 thugs. What are you?" Troy stammered, dropping the broken piggy bank, his hands shaking violently. Caspian said, his voice dropping, an octave, resonating with a demonic, multi-layered echo that rattled the trailer off its foundations. "I'm the reason your ancestors learned to fear the dark." Before the human eye could track his movement, Caspian crossed the room. He didn't just grab Gavin, he moved through him. With a sickening wet tear, Caspian ripped Gavin's dominant arm completely out of its socket. The thug barely had time to register the pain before Caspian backhanded him the sheer force, snapping his neck 180 degrees. Gavin dropped dead before his severed arm hit the floor. Troy shrieked like a terrified animal and scrambled backward, trying to climb out the window he had just watched Lily escape through. Caspian materialized behind him, grabbed him by the belt, and effortlessly threw the 250-pound man through the ceiling of the trailer. The metal roof buckled and tore open as Troy was launched 30 feet into the stormy night sky, his screams fading into the rain. Derek stood completely paralyzed, his gun slipping from his sweaty fingers. The absolute apex of his criminal empire had been dismantled in less than 5 seconds. The arrogant loan shark looked at the monster standing before him and realized with a sudden bladder-releasing terror that the local legends were entirely true. Caspian stepped over the puddle of Gavin's blood and looked down at Derek. "You," Caspian whispered, his fangs fully extending, gleaming in the shadows. "You will serve as an excellent message." The heavy stench of copper and ozone filled the cramped, shattered living space of the mobile home. Derek Gallagher, the man who had held the town of Crest Haven in a vice grip of fear and extortion, was now nothing more than a whimpering, pathetic pile of expensive leather and shattered bravado. He scrambled backward on the blood-slicked linoleum, his hands desperately searching for the weapon he had dropped, but Caspian's boot, a custom Italian leather Oxford, came down precisely on Derek's right wrist. The sound of fracturing bones was sharp and loud, echoing like dry wood snapping in a quiet forest. Derek let out a high-pitched, agonizing shriek, his face contorting in pain. "Please, please, God, I'll give you whatever you want. Money, territory, you want the town, it's yours." Caspian leaned down, the glow of his silver eyes cutting through the dim, sparking shadows of the trailer. His expression was one of profound, cold disgust. "I have wealth that predates your entire nation's existence, worm," Caspian whispered, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, inhuman resonance that made Derek's ears bleed. "And I have no use for a town populated by parasites like you. You dared to touch what is mine. You laid hands on a bloodline that is sacred." "I didn't know," Derek sobbed, tears and snot mixing with the rain on his face. "She's just a diner waitress. She owed me $4,000. I swear to God I didn't know." "You will never speak her name again," Caspian commanded. He reached down and grabbed Derek by the throat, lifting the grown man off the floor with only one hand. Derek's legs kicked uselessly in the air, his face turning a mottled purple, as Caspian's icy fingers crushed his windpipe just enough to bring him to the edge of death, but not over it. "I am going to let you live," Caspian said softly, his fangs retracting slightly as he stared into Derek's terrified, bulging eyes. "Not out of mercy, but out of necessity. You are going to be my messenger. You will go to whoever pulls your pathetic strings in this county. You will tell them that the Sterling estate has claimed Serafina and Lily Hayes. If any human, be it a thug, a debt collector, or law enforcement, steps foot within 5 miles of my mountain, I will not just kill them. I will butcher this entire town street by street until the rivers run thick with your ashes. Do you understand me?" Derek could only manage a frantic, desperate nod, tears streaming down his face. Caspian dropped him. Derek collapsed into the puddle of his dead enforcer's blood, gasping greedily for air, clutching his crushed throat and shattered wrist. "Run," Caspian said. Derek didn't hesitate. He scrambled on his hands and knees, scrambling over the broken door frame and throwing himself into the muddy yard, fleeing into the torrential rain without looking back. He left his SUV, his men, and his dignity behind. Caspian turned his attention to the center of the kitchen. The monstrous aura that had filled the room vanished instantly, replaced by a strange, chilling stillness. He knelt beside Serafina. She was unconscious, her breathing dangerously shallow. The hematoma on the side of her head was severe, and Caspian's hyperacute hearing could detect the terrifyingly slow, irregular rhythm of her failing heart. The internal bleeding was extensive. Human medicine, especially the inadequate kind found in a rural town like Cresthaven, would not save her in time. The front door creaked. Lily stood there, swallowed by Caspian's massive suit jacket, her small face pale and streaked with mud and tears. She looked at the dead body of Gavin, then at her mother, and let out a broken sob. Is my mama dead?" Lily cried, taking a hesitant step forward. "No, little bird," Caspian said, his voice surprisingly gentle, completely devoid of the demonic edge he had used on Derek. "But she is very close to the veil. I must do something that will seem frightening, but you must trust me. I am going to save her." Lily nodded, wiping her nose with the overly long sleeve of the jacket. Caspian brought his own wrist to his mouth. With a lightning-fast motion, he bit into his own pale skin. A single heavy drop of impossibly dark crimson blood welled to the surface. He gently prized Serafina's lips apart and let the single drop fall onto her tongue. The reaction was instantaneous. Serafina's back arched off the floor as a sudden violent gasp of air filled her lungs. The immortal blood acted like liquid fire in her mortal veins, forcefully knitting the ruptured vessels and jump-starting her failing heart. The deep purple bruising on her face began to fade visibly, the swelling receding as if time were reversing. Serafina's eyes flew open. She looked up, disoriented, terrified, and gasping for breath. The first thing she saw was the face of an impossibly beautiful, terrifyingly pale man with silver eyes leaning over her. "Who? What?" she stammered, her voice hoarse. "Hush," Caspian commanded softly, scooping her up into his arms as easily as he had picked up her daughter. "Your debt is erased, Serafina Hayes, but your life now belongs to the mountain." Serafina awoke to the smell of old paper rain and blooming night jasmine. She bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs. The last thing she remembered was the blinding pain of Derek's boot, the taste of copper, and the terrifying, godlike face of a stranger in her kitchen. She frantically scanned her surroundings, expecting to see the moldy ceiling of her mobile home or the sterile bright lights of the county hospital. Instead, she found herself in a bed large enough to fit 5 people, draped in heavy emerald green silk and Egyptian cotton. The room was massive, boasting high-vaulted ceilings with intricate mahogany carvings. A roaring fire crackled in a massive stone fireplace across the room, casting a warm, flickering glow over antique oil paintings and walls lined with leather-bound books. Lily, Serafina screamed, throwing off the heavy duvet. She was wearing a pristine white silk nightgown that certainly didn't belong to her. "She is entirely unharmed, Miss Hayes." Serafina spun around. Sitting in a high-backed velvet armchair near the tall, rain-streaked window was a man. Not the terrifying monster from the trailer, but an older, distinguished gentleman with silver hair, wearing a perfectly tailored 3-piece suit. He held a clipboard in his lap. "Where is my daughter? Where am I? Who are you?" Serafina demanded, stumbling out of the bed. Her body felt strangely light, completely devoid of the chronic back pain and exhaustion that usually plagued her. She pressed her hands to her ribs. They were perfectly fine. Her face felt smooth. "My name is Dr. Arthur Montgomery," the older man said, standing up and adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "I am the resident physician here at the Sterling Estate. Please try not to agitate yourself. Your body went through severe trauma mere hours ago." "The Sterling Estate," Serafina repeated, the blood draining from her face. "The haunted billionaire fortress on the cliff." No, I need my daughter. I'm leaving." The heavy mahogany doors to the bedroom swung open silently. "Mama!" Lily ran into the room, no longer covered in mud and blood. She was scrubbed clean, wearing a beautiful, soft cashmere sweater and leggings holding a silver platter piled high with chocolate chip cookies and strawberries. Serafina dropped to her knees, catching her daughter in a desperate, bone-crushing hug. She buried her face in Lily's hair, crying silently with pure relief. Following closely behind, Lily was Caspian. Serafina froze. The sheer, overwhelming presence of the man sucked the oxygen out of the room. He was dressed flawlessly in dark slacks and a charcoal dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal pale, sculpted forearms. Without the shadows and the rain of the trailer park, his inhuman beauty was blinding. His cheekbones were razor-sharp, his hair dark as a raven's wing, and those silver eyes tracked her every movement with the predatory stillness of a panther. "Dr. Montgomery, you are dismissed," Caspian said, not looking away from Serafina. The doctor bowed deeply, a completely submissive, archaic gesture that sent a chill down Serafina's spine, and quietly exited the room, closing the heavy doors behind him. Serafina stood up, pulling Lily behind her legs protectively. You were in my house! You killed that man!" "I exterminated a pest," Caspian corrected mildly, walking slowly toward a silver tray on a side table and pouring a glass of dark red wine. "And in doing so, I saved your life and the life of your offspring. I expect a measure of gratitude, not hysteria." "Thank you," Serafina forced out her voice, trembling. "Thank you for saving us. But we have to go. If Derek comes back..." Derek Gallagher is currently attempting to explain to his superiors why he is missing his best enforcer and the use of his right hand, Caspian interrupted, taking a sip from his glass. "He will not return to your home, and neither will you. The trailer has been condemned. I purchased the land it sits on an hour ago." Serafina's jaw dropped. You bought my land at 3 in the morning. "I have lawyers on retainer across the globe who do not sleep," Caspian replied dismissively. He set his glass down and closed the distance between them. Serafina instinctively backed up until the back of her legs hit the edge of the mattress. Caspian stopped, just inches away. Up close, he smelled of winter storms and danger. He reached out his long, icy fingers, gently tilting her chin up so she was forced to look into his terrifying eyes. "Why did you save me?" she whispered, her heart beating so fast she thought it might burst. "Because of what runs in your veins, Serafina," Caspian murmured, his gaze dropping to her neck, watching the frantic pulse of her carotid artery. "For centuries, I believed the Sinclair lineage had been wiped out during the French Revolution. A royal bloodline with a very specific, very intoxicating genetic anomaly. A Singer bloodline. It is a scent that drives my kind to absolute madness. It is a miracle you have survived this long in the human world without being discovered by the predators that hide in the shadows." Serafina frowned in utter confusion. "Sinclair, my maiden name is Smith. My family is from Ohio. You have the wrong person." A slow, dark smile spread across Caspian's lips. "Human records are easily forged, but blood never lies. Your great-grandmother was a Sinclair hidden away in America to protect the anomaly, and now you are here, in my domain." "I am not a pet," Serafina said, finding a sudden spark of maternal defiance. "I am a mother, and we are leaving." "If you walk out those doors," Caspian said, his voice dropping to a silken threat, "the men who own Derek Gallagher will gun you down in the streets. You are a loose end. You owe them money, and you witnessed a murder. The local police are owned by the cartel. The mayor is corrupt. There is no safe harbor for you down there." He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "Out there, you are prey. In here, you are protected by the king. Choose." Down in the valley, the morning sun broke over Crest Haven, but it brought no warmth. Sheriff Brody Miller stood in the muddy, rain-soaked yard of Serafina Hayes's mobile home, a half-chewed cigar clamped between his teeth. The scene before him defied every law of physics and criminology he had learned in his 20 years on the force. Yellow police tape surrounded the trailer. The front door was splintered into 100 pieces. Inside, the coroner's team was bagging the body of Gavin Vance, no Gavin Tate, the local bruiser. His arm had been violently ripped from its socket, a feat of strength that would require industrial machinery, not a human hand. But the most disturbing part was the roof. The metal sheeting was peeled back like a tin can. 30 yards away, impaled on the thick branches of an old oak tree, was Troy. He looked as though he had been fired out of a cannon. Sheriff Deputy Collins walked up, looking green around the gills. "We found Derek Gallagher." "Is he dead?" Brody asked gruffly. "No, sir. Found him wandering down Route 9. He's in shock, sir. His wrist is completely crushed. He keeps rocking back and forth in the back of the cruiser." Brody sighed, spitting a piece of tobacco into the mud. He walked over to the squad car and opened the back door. Derek was curled into a ball, pale and sweating profusely. "Derek," Brody said, keeping his voice low. The sheriff was on Gallagher's payroll, but right now he was genuinely terrified. "What the hell happened here? Who did this?" Derek slowly lifted his head. His eyes were wide, vacant, staring past the sheriff at the imposing mountain that loomed over the town. "The mountain!" Derek whispered, his voice hoarse from screaming. "The king of the mountain came down. He took the girl. He took the mother. He said if we cross the boundary, he'll turn the rivers to ash." Brody felt the blood drain from his face. Every local child grew up hearing ghost stories about the Sterling estate. But the corrupt men of Crest Haven knew the truth. The estate paid a massive, untraceable sum into the town's municipal fund every year. It was hush money, an unspoken agreement to leave the mountain alone. "You went after the Hayes woman," Brody hissed, panic rising in his chest. "You idiot. You woke them up." Brody slammed the cruiser door shut. He pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, get Mayor Harrison on the secure line. Tell him we have a code black. The Sterling Treaty is breached." High above the panic of the town, in the sprawling, sunless library of the Sterling estate, Serafina sat stiffly on a leather sofa. Lily was fast asleep in the adjacent room, exhausted by the night's trauma, watched over by a staff of silent, pale maids. Caspian sat across from Serafina, reading a centuries-old leather-bound ledger, as if they were casually discussing the weather. "They know by now," Caspian stated, flipping a delicate parchment page. "The human authorities. They are terrified. They will attempt to cover up the incident to avoid drawing the attention of state authorities, and they will stay far away from my gates." Serafina clutched a warm mug of tea with both hands. "So we're safe." "From the humans entirely," Caspian replied, closing the book and resting his chin on his steepled fingers. "But you are not safe from the world you have inadvertently stepped into, the immortal world. If word spreads that the last of the Sinclair singers is residing in Crest Haven, every ancient creature with a thirst for power and intoxicating blood will descend upon this mountain." "Then why keep me here?" Serafina pleaded, her green eyes wide with genuine fear. "Let me take Lily and disappear. We can change our names, move to Canada, anywhere." Caspian let out a low, dark chuckle that vibrated through the floorboards. "Serafina, you cannot outrun monsters. They will smell you across continents. Your only chance of survival is to be claimed, to be under the absolute, unquestionable protection of a sovereign." He stood up, walking toward a heavy oak desk, and opening a drawer, he pulled out a piece of heavy parchment and an ornate silver dagger. He laid them on the coffee table between them. "I am offering you a pact," Caspian said, his voice devoid of warmth. "All business and ancient authority. You and your daughter will reside in this estate. You will lack nothing. Wealth, education for the child's safety, luxury. It is all yours. You will never scrub another floor. You will never go hungry. And no human will ever dare raise a hand to you again." Serafina stared at the dagger. "And the price?" "Your obedience," Caspian said bluntly. "You do not leave the estate without my direct presence. You follow the rules of my house, and—" He paused, his silver eyes flashing with a sudden predatory hunger that made Serafina's breath catch in her throat. "Once a month, you allow me to sample your blood?" Serafina recoiled, her hands flying to her neck. "You want to drink from me?" "I am a vampire, Serafina," Caspian said smoothly, unapologetically. "I do not sparkle in the sunlight, and I do not survive on the blood of woodland animals. I require human blood. But yours is different. It holds the key to genetic mysteries my kind has sought for millennia. I will not kill you. I will not even harm you. A small incision, a controlled tithe, in exchange for your life and the life of your child. Seraphina looked at the ancient parchment. It wasn't written in English, but in sweeping blood-red Latin script. She thought of Derek's boot. She thought of Lily running into the freezing mud. She thought of the absolute squalor and terror that had been her entire existence. Could she really trade one monster for another? But looking at Caspian, powerful, wealthy, terrifyingly beautiful, she realized this wasn't a choice. It was an ultimatum wrapped in velvet. "If you ever touch my daughter," Seraphina said, her voice shaking, but her gaze locked fiercely with his, "I will find a way to kill you myself." Caspian smiled. It was a genuine, terrifying smile that showed off the tips of his fangs. He found her human defiance utterly intoxicating. "I give you my word as sovereign," Caspian vowed. "The child is under my aegis. Now do we have an accord?" Seraphina slowly reached out with trembling fingers. She picked up the heavy silver dagger. The metal was cold against her skin. She looked at Caspian, then pressed the sharp edge against the palm of her left hand, slicing a shallow, stinging line across her flesh. She held her bleeding hand over the parchment. A single drop of dark red blood fell onto the ancient paper. The moment it hit, the Latin script flared with a brief, brilliant golden light before sinking into the fibers. Caspian exhaled sharply, his eyes locked on the blood in her palm. The hunger in the room was suddenly palpable, a heavy, suffocating pressure. In a blur of motion, he was kneeling in front of her. He took her bleeding hand in his cold grasp, bringing it to his lips. Seraphina gasped as his tongue gently, almost reverently, laved the cut, wiping away the blood. The touch was freezing, yet it sent a jolt of shocking electric heat straight to her core. "Welcome to the Sterling Estate, my beautiful singer," Caspian whispered against her skin, his eyes glowing like twin moons in the dark library. "Your old life is dead. You belong to the king now." For 3 weeks, the Sterling Estate was a gilded, echoing paradise. Seraphina Hayes, a woman who had spent her entire adult life calculating the cost of a gallon of milk, now walked through hallways lined with Renaissance masterpieces and tapestries spun from real gold. Her daughter Lily thrived. The chronic cough that had plagued the child in the damp, moldy trailer vanished entirely, replaced by the rosy cheeks of a girl who spent her days in the estate's massive indoor botanical gardens, tutored by gentle, soft-spoken scholars. But for Seraphina, the luxury was an undercurrent to a terrifying reality. She was waiting for the bill to come due. She saw Caspian Sterling infrequently during the day. As a creature of the night, he conducted his vast global business empires from his sunless study. But every evening, exactly at twilight, he would join her for dinner in the grand dining hall. He did not eat the Michelin star food prepared for her. He merely sat at the head of the impossibly long mahogany table, nursing a glass of deep red wine, his luminescent silver eyes tracking her every movement. The air between them was always thick, charged with an invisible, suffocating electricity that made Seraphina's skin flush and her heart race. It was on the night of the full moon that the quiet tension finally snapped. Seraphina was in her private chambers, brushing out her long, dark hair before the vanity mirror. She wore a slip of black silk, a gift from the estate's silent wardrobe mistress, Clara Higgins. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted. The flames in the grand fireplace flickered and dimmed, casting long, dancing shadows across the Persian rugs. She didn't need to turn around to know he was there. The scent of winter rain and dangerous ancient magic filled the room. "It has been precisely 21 days since our pact, Seraphina," Caspian's velvet voice murmured from the darkness. Seraphina's hand trembled, dropping the silver hairbrush onto the vanity with a sharp clatter. She stood up, her bare feet sinking into the plush carpet, and turned to face him. Caspian stepped into the dim light. He had shed his usual immaculate suit jacket. He wore only a white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, highlighting the stark marble-like perfection of his collarbones. His eyes were no longer their calm, cool silver. They were swirling with a dark, terrifying crimson hunger. The monster had clawed its way to the surface. "I remember," Seraphina whispered, her voice barely leaving her throat. She instinctively touched the side of her neck, right over her wildly beating pulse. Caspian closed the distance between them with terrifying speed. One moment he was by the door, the next he was towering over her, his chest brushing against hers. He reached out his icy fingers, wrapping gently around her wrists, pulling her hands away from her neck. "You are trembling," Caspian noted, his voice a low rumbling purr that vibrated directly into her chest. "Are you afraid of me, my singer?" Yes, she answered honestly, staring up into his predatory gaze. You're a predator, and I am. You are a queen disguised as a peasant, Caspian interrupted softly. He leaned down, his face burying into the crook of her neck. Serafina gasped as his cold nose traced the line of her jaw. He inhaled deeply, a ragged, shuddering breath. Gods, your scent, it has driven me to the edge of madness for 3 weeks. I have tasted nothing but ash since the drop you gave me in that filthy human dwelling. Get it over with, she breathed, squeezing her eyes shut, preparing for agonizing pain. I do not wish to hurt you, Serafina, he whispered against her skin. Do not fight it. Serafina felt the sudden razor-sharp prick of his fangs, piercing the delicate skin over her jugular. She stiffened, a sharp cry escaping her lips, but the pain vanished in less than a second. Instead of agony, a sudden blinding wave of pure euphoria crashed over her. It was as if liquid heat had been injected directly into her bloodstream, radiating from the bite mark and spreading to every nerve ending in her body. Her knees buckled, but Caspian's strong arm wrapped securely around her waist, holding her flush against his rock-hard frame. As he drank, the room spun. Serafina's mind was suddenly flooded with chaotic, beautiful, terrifying images that didn't belong to her. She saw medieval battlefields, slick with blood, grand ballrooms in 18th century France, and the lonely, desolate peaks of the Himalayas. She was seeing Caspian's memories. The singer's blood didn't just feed the vampire, it created a psychic bridge. She let out a soft, involuntary moan, her hands coming up to grip his broad shoulders, her fingers digging into the fabric of his shirt. She was melting into him, entirely consumed by the intoxicating narcotic effect of his venom mixing with her unique bloodline. With a violent, supreme effort of will, Caspian tore himself away. Serafina staggered, gasping for air, as if she had been underwater. Caspian had backed up against the heavy oak door, his chest heaving, wiping a smear of brilliant red from his lips. His eyes were wide, the crimson slowly fading back to silver, filled with a mixture of awe and terror. It is true, Caspian whispered, looking at his own trembling hands. The legends of the Sinclair bloodline. You are magnificent. Serafina touched her neck. The puncture wounds were already closed, leaving only a faint tingling heat. She didn't feel weak or drained. She felt vibrant, alive, and impossibly connected to the ancient creature standing before her. But hundreds of miles away, in a sprawling penthouse overlooking the neon-lit skyline of Seattle, another ancient creature was not feeling nearly as euphoric. Lord Reginald Astor smashed his crystal whiskey glass against the floor-to-ceiling window. He was a vampire of immense cruelty, the leader of the Obsidian Circle, a rival faction that had waged a shadow war against Caspian Sterling for over 2 centuries. Standing nervously before Astor was Jonathan Mercer, a corrupt, high-ranking detective from the Crest Haven Police Department. Mercer was sweating profusely, clutching a briefcase full of $100 bills. Are you absolutely certain? Mercer Astor hissed, his eyes completely black, devoid of irises or sclera. Do not lie to me. If you are wasting my time, I will peel your skin off while you watch. I swear, Lord Astor, Mercer stammered, backing away. Sheriff Brody showed me the police report before the mayor buried it. The Sterling King came down from the mountain himself. He ripped a man apart with his bare hands just to save a diner waitress named Serafina. Derek Gallagher heard him say it. He called her a singer. Astor went entirely still. The rage in his face melted into a twisted, euphoric smile. A singer? Astor breathed, pacing across the room. Caspian has found a singer, and not just any singer to risk breaking the treaty. It must be a pure strain, a Sinclair. I don't know about that, sir, Mercer squeaked. I just know they are up in the estate. Do you know what happens when a vampire completely drains a pure singer on the night of a blood eclipse? Mercer Astor asked, turning to the window and looking at the moon. They conquer the sun. They become a daywalker. They become a god. Caspian is hoarding power that belongs to me. Astor turned to his heavily armed supernatural lieutenants standing in the shadows of the penthouse. Summon the circle. Hire the best human mercenaries money can buy. Bribe the Cresthaven police force to turn a blind eye. We march on the Sterling estate tomorrow night. The attack began not with a roar, but with a terrifying silence. It was 2 a.m. Serafina was asleep in her chambers, the lingering warmth of Caspian's bite still a comforting presence in her mind. Down in the estate's subterranean security hub, the massive state-of-the-art surveillance screen suddenly went to static. The enchanted iron gates at the bottom of the mountain, forged by medieval warlocks to repel anything unnatural, dissolved into pools of molten slag. Reginald Astor had brought an army, over 200 heavily armed men, a mix of rogue vampires, feral shapeshifters, and highly trained human mercenaries outfitted with incendiary rounds and ultraviolet lasers poured onto the estate grounds. Leading the human contingent was Mayor Harrison and Sheriff Brody Miller, bought and paid for by Astor's limitless wealth. They had justified the treason by telling themselves they were taking back their town from the monster on the hill. The first alarm sounded when the grand oak doors of the manor were blown completely off their hinges by a military-grade explosive. Serafina jolted awake, the sound rattling the windows of her bedroom. The heavy oak door to her room flew open. Caspian stood there, but he was no longer the composed, elegant aristocrat. He was dressed in tactical black armor, holding a wicked-looking broadsword that gleamed with an ethereal blue light. His eyes were burning like miniature suns. "Get up!" Caspian commanded, his voice sharp and utterly terrifying. "Take Lily. Go to the panic room beneath the library. Do not come out no matter what you hear." "Caspian, what's happening?" Serafina panicked, throwing off her blankets and running to the adjoining room to scoop up a crying Lily. "Astor!" Caspian spat the name like poison. "He has breached the boundary. He knows what you are." "Mama, I'm scared," Lily cried, burying her face in Serafina's shoulder. "I will not let them touch you," Caspian vowed, stepping forward and placing a cold, reassuring hand on Serafina's cheek. The psychic connection they had forged during the feeding flared, and Serafina could feel the absolute unyielding wall of his protective rage. "Run!" Serafina ran. She navigated the labyrinthine hallways of the estate, carrying her daughter, listening to the horrifying sounds of war echoing from below, the sickening thud of bodies hitting walls, the staccato burst of automatic gunfire, and the inhuman, blood-curdling shrieks of vampires tearing each other apart. She reached the library, her hands shaking violently, found the hidden lever behind a massive bust of Shakespeare. The bookshelf swung open, revealing a steel-reinforced bunker. She rushed inside, sealing the heavy vault door behind her. Upstairs, the grand foyer of the Sterling estate had become a slaughterhouse. Caspian moved like a shadow of death. Human mercenaries fired high-caliber rounds at him, but he was too fast. He deflected bullets with the flat of his blade, his movements a blur of lethal precision. He decapitated 3 feral vampires in a single sweeping arc of his sword, their bodies turning to ash before they even hit the marble floor. Sheriff Brody Miller stood trembling by the destroyed entryway, holding an assault rifle. He watched in absolute horror as the king of the mountain dismantled a platoon of professional killers in seconds. Caspian suddenly appeared directly in front of Brody. The sheriff screamed, pulling the trigger, but Caspian simply caught the barrel of the gun and crushed it like a soda can. "You brought war to my home, Brody," Caspian whispered, his fangs fully descended. "Astor made us," Brody sobbed, falling to his knees. "He said he'd kill our families. And what do you think I am going to do?" Caspian replied coldly. He backhanded the sheriff, sending the corrupt lawman flying through a priceless stained glass window into the storm outside. But Caspian's distraction cost him. From the shadows of the grand staircase, Reginald Astor emerged. He didn't use a sword. He wielded an ancient jagged dagger carved from the bone of a deceased archangel, a weapon explicitly designed to kill immortals. "Beautiful form, Caspian," Astor sneered, clapping slowly. "But you have gone soft, playing house with a human pet." "Astor," Caspian snarled, his grip tightening on his broadsword, "you are trespassing. I will mount your head on my gates." "You won't live long enough," Astor laughed. With impossible speed, Astor lunged. The 2 ancient vampires clashed, the shockwave of their impact shattering every window on the first floor. They fought with a savagery that defied physics, destroying priceless antiques and tearing down structural pillars. But Asta had an advantage. He wasn't trying to win a fair fight. He was trying to stall. While Caspian was engaged, Asta's elite Shadow Walkers vampires with the ability to turn entirely intangible had slipped past the battle. They moved through the walls of the estate, bypassing the steel vault of the panic room, and materialized directly inside. Serafina screamed as three dark figures formed out of thin air. One of them backhanded her, sending her crashing into a steel desk, while another grabbed the terrified Lily. "Got the prize, Lord Asta," one of the Shadow Walkers communicated through an earpiece. "Bring them to the courtyard." Asta's voice crackled back. Serafina, her vision swimming and blood trickling down her forehead, watched in horror as the vampires dragged her screaming daughter through the walls. Adrenaline and pure feral maternal instinct flooded her system. She didn't have weapons, she didn't have magic, but she had the singer's blood. She grabbed a heavy iron paperweight from the desk, slammed the panic room release button, and ran back into the war zone. The courtyard of the Sterling estate was slick with rain and gore. Caspian had been driven out into the storm by Asta's relentless assault. The Vampire King was bleeding. Asta's bone dagger had managed to slice across Caspian's ribcage, leaving a glowing, necrotic wound that refused to heal. Caspian was kneeling in the mud, using his broadsword to keep himself upright, breathing heavily. Asta stood over him, victorious, twirling the bone dagger. "Did you really think you could hide her, Caspian?" Asta mocked. "A pure Sinclair. Did you think you could keep the Daywalker Ascension all to yourself? You don't know what you're talking about." Caspian gasped, coughing up a spatter of black blood. "Oh, I know exactly how it works." Asta smiled sadistically. "Drain the singer completely on the eve of the blood eclipse, and the sun will never burn us again. You were just waiting for the right lunar cycle. I'm just taking your prize." The heavy wooden doors of the manor burst open. The Shadow Walkers emerged into the rain, dragging a thrashing, screaming Lily. "Mama, Caspian!" Lily cried out. Caspian's eyes widened in sheer panic. He tried to stand, but the necrotic magic of the dagger forced him back down. "Ah, the little offshoot," Asta hummed, looking at Lily. "Not quite a pure singer, but her blood will make an excellent appetizer." Asta stepped toward the child, his fangs elongating. "Get away from her!" Serafina sprinted out of the manor doors. She didn't hesitate. She threw herself onto the back of the Shadow Walker, holding Lily, bringing the heavy iron paperweight down brutally on the back of his skull. The vampire stumbled, dropping the child. "Lily, run to Caspian!" Serafina screamed. Lily scrambled through the mud and threw her arms around Caspian's neck, crying hysterically. Caspian wrapped his massive arm around the tiny girl, shielding her with his body, his eyes locked in fury on Asta. Asta casually backhanded Serafina. The force lifted her off her feet, sending her crashing into the stone fountain in the center of the courtyard. She slumped to the ground, her ribs fractured, coughing up blood. "Pathetic human," Asta sighed. He walked slowly toward Serafina, grabbing her by the hair and lifting her up. He exposed her delicate neck. "I suppose I don't need the child. The mother will do nicely to grant me the son." "Asta, stop." Caspian roared, a sound of absolute, unadulterated heartbreak. "Watch, King," Asta smiled. "Watch me take your throne." Asta sank his fangs deep into Serafina's neck, but he didn't account for the bond. When Caspian had taken Serafina's blood 3 weeks prior, he hadn't just fed. He had left a trace of his own ancient sovereign magic inside her veins. Serafina wasn't just a human anymore. She was marked by the king. The moment Asta's fangs pierced her skin and he tasted her blood, his eyes flew wide open in shock. Instead of the sweet, narcotic euphoria of a singer, Asta swallowed liquid hellfire. The blood burned him from the inside out. Asta screamed, releasing Serafina, and stumbling backward, clutching his throat. Black smoke began to pour from his eyes and mouth. What is this?" Asta shrieked, falling to his knees as his veins began to glow with a sickly, burning orange light. Serafina collapsed, gasping for air, but through the pain she looked at Caspian. The psychic bond flared to life, stronger than ever. "Drink from me," she thought, projecting the words directly into his mind. "Finish it." Caspian pushed Lily gently behind him. Drawing on the absolute last reserves of his strength, he lunged across the courtyard. He didn't go for Asta, he went to Serafina. He fell to his knees beside her. Without a word, Serafina reached up her bloody fingers, gently pulling his head down to her neck. Caspian bit down over Asta's puncture wounds. The moment the king's fangs reconnected with his singer's blood, the reaction was apocalyptic. The sky above the estate literally split open. A massive shockwave of kinetic silver energy exploded from the two of them, flattening the remaining mercenaries and shattering the courtyard stones. The necrotic wound on Caspian's chest healed instantly. His muscles expanded, and the silver light in his eyes grew so bright it illuminated the entire courtyard like daylight. He stood up, pulling Serafina with him. She wasn't weak. The magic looping between them was healing her fractures in seconds. Caspian turned to face Asta, who was still choking on the cursed blood. Caspian raised his hand. He didn't even need his sword. With a simple, brutal clenching of his fist, the telekinetic force of a fully empowered vampire king wrapped around Reginald Asta's body. "You thought she was my prey, Asta?" Caspian's voice echoed like thunder across the mountainside. "She is my queen." Caspian twisted his wrist. Asta's body imploded. The ancient vampire was crushed into a singularity of ash and bone dust, blown away by the heavy rain before it even hit the ground. The remaining shadow walkers and mercenaries took one look at the glowing, godlike king and the woman standing fiercely beside him, and they broke. They dropped their weapons and fled into the woods, screaming in terror. The battle was over. Caspian slowly turned to Serafina. The glowing aura faded, leaving them standing in the quiet rain. He looked at the blood staining her white silk slip. "You saved me," he whispered, stepping forward and resting his forehead against hers. "We saved each other," Serafina replied, wrapping her arms around his waist. Lily ran over, hugging them both tightly around the legs. Caspian looked down at the little family he had accidentally acquired, the icy, centuries-old void in his chest, entirely filled with something warm, something remarkably human. The next morning, the sun rose over Cresthaven. Mayor Harrison and the remaining corrupt officials were found hanging by their ankles from the town's welcome sign, a final message from the mountain. The town was purged. A new order was established. Up in the estate, Serafina stood by the massive glass windows of the library, watching the sunrise. She felt the heavy, comforting presence of Caspian step up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, completely unharmed by the morning light filtering through the glass. Asta had been right about one thing: the singer's blood granted miracles. But he had been wrong about how to use it. It wasn't about draining life, it was about sharing it. "Are you ready to rule this world, my singer?" Caspian murmured against her ear. Serafina smiled, leaning back into the Vampire King's embrace. "I was born for it." Thank you so much for watching the epic conclusion of Little Girl Ran to Vampire King Crying. Did you expect that massive twist with Serafina's blood at the end? Let us know in the comments below. If you love this dark romance story, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends who love supernatural drama, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. See you in the next tale.